Okay, today we are doing Daf Sadi Hey Amud Aleph. The machlokes that we saw yesterday is what is the shape of the showbread. There are two shitas in the Gemara. One is that the showbread is flat on bottom, like a very wide-based letter U, and the other one is that it's like a V. Okay? But it's a three-dimensional V. So instead of being a two-dimensional V, it's elongated so that it's like a big V, right? But the Gemara says that that's the way that's called is a sfina roketis, like a ship that's bobbing on the water, because in order for it to remain buoyant, it has to have a pointy bottom. So the Gemara had said that there were panels on the sides of the showbread table to prop up these V-shaped loaves. But that's the machlokes, what the shape of the showbread was. So meisvei. So now we raise a contradiction, and it's going to be a challenge to one of those opinions. It's the very top of Tzadi Hey Amud Aleph. Kimin kaveres hayala betanur, v'dome kimin tavla mirubas. The Brisa says that there was a mold that was inside the oven where they baked the showbread to shape it properly. And it was like a cube-shaped tray, so that they would insert the dough so that it would bake properly. Now, according to what that implies that it was flat on the bottom, like a tray, not V-shaped. So the Gemara says, so how do you resolve that? Ema upia doma kimin tavla merubas. So the answer is that it was just placed on top of the bread to hold of the top of the bread together, the top of the V. But the bottom of the V was still V-shaped like a boat. Tanya Kaman Omar Kimin Sfina Roketis. But now, in conclusion to this discussion, we have a brisa that supports the opinion that it was the shape of a boat on the bottom. The Tanya, Arba'a Sinifim Shel Zahav Hayusham, Mefutzalim meirashein kimin dakranin hayu, shesomchim bahem es alechem shudome kimin sfino rokedes. The Brisa says explicitly that the purpose of this vertical shelving, or these panels that were on the side of the showbread table, there were 4 of these panels, 2 I guess on either side, and the function of these panels, they were split on the top, so that they were pliable. I believe that's what it means. In other words, you had, I don't even know what we could compare it to today, but let's say you have a vertical panel on either side to sort of prop up and support the shape of the V-shaped bread in the middle. You would want the top of those panels to be split so that if the bread was uneven slightly, the different splits, the different slats of wood would bend slightly to support the bread and would prop it up in the process. And that's what the Brisa is describing. But at the final analysis, the Brisa says it needed to be propped up like that because the bread was in the shape of a boat on the bottom. So that concludes that discussion. It seems that the Gemara is sort of basically leaving this as a machlokes, but yet we have a brisa to support the opinion that it was V-shaped.
So what supported the tray then? The U-shaped tray is only, in terms of baking purposes, if it was like a boat, why would you need that U-shaped tray? Like it's like a rectangle with kind of like a U. And
I understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
I don't understand what tray are you talking about. In the previous brisa?
Yeah.
So the Gemara had answered that it was on top. It wasn't on the bottom to bake. It wasn't a baking tray for the bottom of the bread. It was a baking mold for the top of the bread to hold the V together on the top.
Oh, okay.
You understand?
Yeah.
So it was like a deep dish, but you would invert it on the top of the dough to hold it together on the top. But on the bottom, it was still V-shaped. Okay. Ibayalu. So now the next question is raised. Totally new topic of having to do with the lechem haponim. Lechem haponim nifsal b'masos, oinu nifsal b'masos. Historically, when the Jewish people would travel in the desert, periodically they would have to dismantle the Mishkan and travel with it. Let's say it's on a Tuesday in the middle of the week. We know that the showbread remains on the shulchan for the entire week, At the end of the week on Shabbos, the old bread is given to the Kohanim to eat, and the new showbread is placed on the shulchan. What would happen if on Tuesday the announcement, the Chatzotzros blast, time to dismantle the Mishkan, we got to go. So the showbread, what is its status? Does it become now puzzle, right, because it's no longer inside the Mishkan, or does it remain kosher? So Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, Chad Omer nifsal v'chad Omer eino nifsal. So it seems we have a machlokus here between these two Amoraim. One says it becomes puzzle, the other one says it does not. Man do Omer nifsal dichsiv kasher yachnu ken yisau. Ma b'chani yasu nifsal biyotzei, af b'nisi yasu nifsal biyotzei. So why do you hold it's puzzle? The person who says it's puzzle says because the Torah compares the traveling of the Mishkan to the encampment of the Mishkan. Just like during the encampment, if the bread were to leave the walls of the Mishkan, it would become puzzle. So too, when the Mishkan is dismantled, since the bread has left the walls of the Mishkan, because the walls don't exist anymore, the bread becomes puzzle. That's one argument. Let's look at the other side. Man do'amar eino nifsal dichsiv v'lechem hatomid olav yihiyah. The other opinion is, there's another pasuk that says that the showbread shall always be in its state on the showbread table, which implies that as long as it remains on the table, it's okay. It remains static and unchanging. And therefore, even though there's no more walls of the Mishkan, as long as the bread remains on the table, it's okay. Now, v'idach nami haksiv kasher yachnu ken yisahu, li'idach gisa, ma b'chani yasu ki lo yatsu mimakomo lo mifsal, af b'nisi yasu ki lo yatsu mimakomo lo mifsal. So the Gemara says, according to that latter opinion that the bread remains kosher, what are you going to do with that previous pasuk that compares the traveling to the encampment, which implies that it's puzzle because the walls are no longer there? So the Gemara says, no, you can read the pasuk in the other direction, that the state of encampment is just like the state of traveling. Just like when the bread is traveling and there's no walls, it's still kosher because it's on the table. So too, as long as the bread remains on the table, it remains kosher regardless of whether the Mishkan is traveling or whether it's stationary. V'idach nami haksiv v'lechem hatamid olav yihiyah. Now let's go back to the first opinion. What are you going to do with that pasuk that says that the bread remains static in its kedusha status as long as it's on the table, regardless of whether there are walls or not? Ela ki asa Rav Dimi Omar b'mesura dekuli amolo pligi, ela ki pligi b'mesulak. So Rav Dimi says, you know what, you're right. When the bread is on the table, you have that pasuk that seems to be clearly indicating that the bread's kedusha remains static and does not become puzzle. That's not the machlokas. The machlokas is only when the bread has been removed from the table. Now, what do we mean by that? On Shabbos, you remove the old bread and you put on the new bread.
Slid it off.
You slide it off, yeah.
Well, didn't they slide it and the next one was slid on automatically?
Yeah, but what would happen with the old bread? The Kohanim eat it. So what happens on Shabbos? The Kohanim get their loaves of bread that from the old bread. And before they have a chance to eat it, it's Motzoi Shabbos, we just made Havdalah, we were about to have Malava Malka with this bread, and all of a sudden, we got to go, right? So the question now is, the bread is no longer on the showbread table. Does it become puzzle because now the walls are coming down, and it's not protected by the table anymore, or does it remain kosher? So, quick, these guys were not yeshiva bachar. So, man da'amar nifsal dichsiv kasher yachanu ken yisau mabachani yaso nifsal biyotze af benisi yaso nifsal biyotze. So, if you learn it's puzzle, because the pasuk compares the traveling to the encampment, just like at the time of encampment, if the bread leaves the walls of the Mishkan, it's puzzle. So too, if the bread it's not on the table anymore, there's no more walls, it becomes puzzle. So Laman do'amar eino nifsal dichsiv v'nasa ohel moed afal pi shenasa ohel moedu. So the other opinion says no. There's a pasuk that says that the Mishkan shall travel, and what that implies is that even when the Mishkan is all rolled up and folded up and moving, it still has protective power over the holy things that remain in its environment. So as long as those loaves of bread are traveling proximally through the rolled up Mishkan, it's still okay. Now, v'idach nami haksiv kasher yachanu kein yisau. So leidach nikisa ma b'chaniyaso kilo mapik leilo mivsol af b'nesiyaso kilo mapik leilo mivsol. So what are you going to do? What's the latter opinion going to do with the first pasuk that seems to say that, just like when it's encamped, if it leaves the walls of the Mishkan, so too when it's traveling, if it leaves the walls of the Mishkan, it's puzzle. He says, read it the other way. Just like when it's traveling, the Kodshim remain holy and not puzzle as long as they stay within the environs of the rolled up Mishkan. So too, as long as the Kodshim stay within the environs of the Mishkan, it's always going to be kosher. That's how they'll learn it. V'idach nami haksiv v'nasa ohel moed. But so what's the first opinion going to do that says it's puzzle? What do you do with the fact that the Torah considers the Mishkan to still be a Mishkan even when it's all rolled up so that it protects the lechem? So hahu ledegalim hu da'asa. That's not teaching you that halacha according to that opinion. According to this opinion, it says that it's puzzle. All the pasuk is teaching you is that when the Mishkan travels, it has to travel along the same encampment configuration as when the Mishkan is stationary, which means the degalim, the banners of the tribes, they all have to travel in formation, like a marching band. In other words, that's the way that the Jewish people are supposed to travel in the same way that they're encamped. That's what the pasuk is teaching you, that the Mishkan is still the Mishkan, and you therefore have to surround it in the same configuration as before. V'idach mimachane halavim b'soch hamachanos nafka. And the other opinion says, no, that's not what that pasuk is coming for, because I have a different pasuk to tell you that when you travel in the same configuration. As the pasuk says, that the machane levia, the Levite camp, shall still be within the other camps, even while the Mishkan is moving. So that teaches you that everyone has to be in configuration even when they're moving. Now, Meisvei. So the Gemara now says, okay, so it seems like you're saying that this is the machlokas now. It's only when the bread is off the table and we're traveling, does the bread become pasul or not? So let me raise a contradiction. B'shas siluk masos, kachim nifsalim, biyotze, v'zavinu mitzarim mishtalchen chutz l'mechitzasan. So the Brisa now says two things. The first statement is going to be problematic for now, and we'll analyze the second statement shortly. But the first statement is that when the Mishkan is traveling, it's folded up and it's traveling, all kachim become pasul, which means if there's any sacrificial meat that you haven't consumed yet, it becomes pasul because there's no longer walls of a Mishkan. And the second statement is that even though normally, when the Mishkan is stationary, you have to send out of the camp anyone who's tameh, namely zavin and mitzorayin. A zav is a person who's had a seminal discharge. He has to be ejected from the Levite camp. And a person who's had a mitzorah tuma has to be sent even out of the Israelite camp. But that's only when what? When the Mishkan is standing. When the Mishkan is now folded up and we're traveling, these tameh people can come back into the camp. So that's the end of the brisa. But the problem is the first part. My lava filu lechem apanim. It says that all kachim become pasul. So how can there be an opinion that says that when the Mishkan is traveling and it's folded up, the bread is still kosher? So the Gemara says, lo bar mi lechem hapanim. No, maybe it means all kachim except the lechem hapanim. Lechem hapanim still remains kosher. So the Gemara says, Monavshach, I ohel moed davkahu afilu kachim nami. I ohel moed lav davkahu afilu lechem hapanim nami. The Gemara says, make up your mind. Why should there be any logical distinction? If the Mishkan is still called the Mishkan while it's folded up and traveling, so then it should have the protective power to keep all kachim kosher, not just the lechem hapanim. And if it's not considered a Mishkan while it's traveling, so then it shouldn't have any protective power at all, neither over all other kachim nor over the lechem hapanim. So why should there be any difference? So Ela ki asa rabin Omar Ela ki asa rabin Omar Omar b'mesuder Omar b'mesulak velo pligay. So rather comes Rabin and he says we have to totally modify our understanding. You're right. This latter brisa that we just saw clearly indicates that when the Mishkan is folded up, all kachim become pasul. So what's the machlokus then? There really is no machlokus. This machlokus that we thought was a machlokus between Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Shua ben Levi really isn't a machlokus. When the bread is on the table and the Mishkan is traveling, the table preserves the kedusha of the bread. And that's what makes it different from all other kachim, which are not on a special kli shares that protects them. But when the bread is off the table, because the kohanim have already gotten their bread, so then once the mishkan is folded up, it no longer has the protective power, and the bread becomes pasul just like all other kachim. And that's the final statement of the Gemara. There's no machlokas, this is the rule. Now, Omer Abaye, Shma mina yesh siluk masos balayla. Di isal kadaitach ein siluk masos balayla, emas matli litzafra, ma'ir yemishum yodse tepuk le de ifsolei belina. So the Gemara now says, Abaye makes a very insightful statement. He says, listen, from this whole discussion that we were talking about before, about the whole idea of the Jewish people traveling and taking the showbread with them Motzoi Shabbos because they heard the trumpet go off as they were about to sit down for Malava Malka, this teaches me that you are allowed to travel at night because there's a thinking that perhaps the Torah maybe only would allow you to travel during the day. So what's the alternative? That we can travel only during the day and not at night? Then this whole discussion becomes moot. You know why? Because there's a much more basic reason why the lechem would become pasul if we could only travel during the day. If we could only travel during the day, sanctified bread that is removed off of the table on Shabbos, you can only eat it that day Shabbos and that Motzoi Shabbos until dawn of Sunday. If you leave it over until Sunday morning, it becomes pasul through the principle of lina, leftover kudshim. And if that's the case, then it's moot whether, it's outside the Mishkan, inside the Mishkan, whether the Mishkan protects it, doesn't protect it, it's going to be pasul no matter what because of lina, because it's past its expiration. So therefore, you have to say that this whole discussion reveals to us that you can travel at night, because if you could only travel during the day, this discussion would be a moot discussion. So the Gemara says, what are you shkoyach Abaye, but what are you telling me that I didn't already know from the psukim? Pshita, laleches yomam v'laylaksiv. The Torah itself says you can travel both day and night. So the Gemara says, no, that pasuk I could have learned like this. Mahu detema, hani mili hecha de akur biyamama. Aval hecha de lo akur biyamama belelia lo matzi akri ka mashmalon. From that pasuk, I might have thought that yes, it's true, the Torah says you can travel during the day and night. But maybe that means that if you depart during the day, you can continue traveling into the night. But that you don't have a right to begin your departure at night. So that's why Abaye says, I need to make a point of saying that from this whole discussion, we see that you can even begin the departure, like Malava Malka, let's get out of here, and you can begin the departure at nighttime. So now the Gemara says, okay, that concludes that discussion. But let's go back to that brisa. Remember, the second statement of the brisa was that while the Mishkan is traveling, all people who are tameh can come back into the camp, into the configuration. So that raises a contradiction, or a minhi, huglulu haparoches hutru hazavin umutzarin likanes l'sham. That, it says, just the opposite. The Brisa had said that even while we're traveling, people who are tameh have to remain outside the camp. That's what the Brisa said. Mm-hmm. The problem is that this Brisa says just the opposite, that once the paroches in the Mishkan is rolled up, then everyone can come back into the camp. So how do you reconcile? You have the previous Brisa that says they have to remain outside the camp. You have this Brisa which says that they're allowed to come back in the camp while we're traveling. So Amar Ravashi lo kasha ha-Rabbi Eliezer ha-Rabbanan. The answer is it's a machlokas tanoim. Now where do we see this machlokas tanoim? D'Tanya, and this is now a brisa that talks about a completely different situation. Not about the traveling of the Mishkan, but rather it's referring to the following halacha. On Erev Pesach, we all know that the Jewish people collectively bring their individual korban pesachs. What happens if an individual is tameh? What's the halacha? He's come in contact with death. He defers it till Pesach Sheni. Very good. What happens if the majority of the tzibor is tameh? So we say tuma hutra b'tzibor. Tuma is, the laws of tuma are suspended, and we allow people who have come in contact with the dead to bring their korban pesach on Erev Pesach, even though normally we prohibit tumah from entering into the Machane Shechina, into the camp where the Mishkan is. If someone's come in contact with the dead, here we allow it. So the question now is, tumah is hutra b'tzibor when the majority of the people have come in contact with the dead. Does that mean that other types of tumah are also suspended? So if a person is a mitzora, or if a person is a zav, his tumah is also suspended? So this is a machlokas between Rabbi Eliezer and the Chachamim. Rabbi Eliezer Omer Yachol Dachku Zavin Mitzrayim V'Nichnasu Lazar BePesach Haba BeTumah Yachol Yehu Chayavin Tamulomar V'Shalchu Min HaMachane Kol Tzaro V'Chol Zav V'Chol Tamei LaNefesh. So you might think that in a year where we allow them to bring their carbon Pesach in a state of Tumah because the majority of the Tzibor has come in contact with the dead, so you might think that if a person who's a Zav or a Mitzora pushes his way into the Mishkan, he incurs the violation of entering into the Mishkan and will be punished for that. So therefore the Pasuk says no, that you have to send out of the camp anyone who is a Mitzora, anyone who's a Zav, and anyone who's come in contact with the dead. What you see from that connection of these three types of Tumah is B'shashet mei mesa mishtalchin zavim mitzora mishtalchin, ein tmei mesa mishtalchin, ein zavim mitzora mishtalchin. That you only have to send out of the camp the Mitzora and the Zav when the laws of Tumas Meis apply. But when the laws of Tumas Meis, coming in contact with the dead, do not apply, then you also don't have to send out of the camp the Mitzora and the Zav. This is all according to Rabbi Eliezer. And therefore Rabbi Eliezer says, when the laws of Tumas Meis are suspended, the laws of Tumas Zav and the laws of Tumas Mitzora are also suspended. Now, comes along the Gemara, and by the way, the Chachamim disagree with that. The Chachamim say that no, just because Tumas Meis is suspended, the laws of Zav and Mitzora still apply. And therefore, if a guy is a Mitzora, he cannot bring his Karban Pesach because he still has to remain outside of the Israelite camp. He can't come anywhere near, right? So therefore, this is the machlokus over there by Karban Pesach, but we can apply that machlokus to over here. When you roll up the Mishkan, the only place that a person with Tumas Meis is not allowed to enter is into the Mishkan itself. He's allowed into the Machane Yisrael, he's allowed into Machane Levia, but once you've rolled up the Mishkan, there's no longer a Machane Shechina, because you've sort of demolished that part of the camp. And therefore, there is no more preclusion of a person who has Tumas Meis. Since he's no longer precluded, therefore, according to Rabbi Eliezer, Zavin and Mitzorayin are no longer precluded from anywhere either. But according to the Chachamim, just because there's no place of preclusion for a person with Tumas Meis, that has nothing to do with the preclusion of a person with Tsaras and Zav. And therefore, they still are precluded. And therefore, you want to know how you reconcile these two brises. The brisa that says that a Zav and the Mitzora must still remain out of the camp goes according to the Chachamim. The brisa that says that Zavim and Mitzrayim can come back into the camp once the Mishkan has been dismantled, that goes according to Rabbi Eliezer. Let us go on. Next Mishnah. Echas shtei halechem ve'echas lechem haponim lishasan va'arichasan b'chutz va'afiyasan b'fnim ve'enan dochas es haShabbos. We're going to see a three-way machlokas here, and the Tanakama of the Mishnah basically says as follows. Now he makes two statements. Statement number one is that the preparation of the dough, which means kneading the dough, forming it into a loaf, that's done outside the temple, but the baking in an oven must be done inside the temple of the shtei halechem, the bread on Shavuos, and the lechem haponim, the show bread, that's done weekly. Baked inside, but prepared outside. Okay? The second statement of the Tanakama is that you cannot bake this bread on Shabbos because the laws of baking do not override Shabbos. And therefore you must bake it when? Erev Shabbos. You got to bake it Erev Shabbos, just like you bake your challahs Erev Shabbos. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Kol Ma'aseyim Bifnim. Rabbi Yehuda disagrees with the Tanakama, and he says that the dough is prepared inside and it's baked inside. Now we have a third opinion, and that's Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon Omer, La'olam hevi ragel Omer, Shtei halechem v'lechem haponim kisheros ba'azar kisheros bebeis pagi. Get into the habit of reminding yourself that the lechem hapanim can be equally prepared completely, both prepared and baked, both inside the temple and in Beis Pagi, which is outside the temple. So we have a three-way machlokas as far as the location of the bread's preparation. According to the Tanna Kama, the dough stages can be done outside the temple. The baking must be done inside. According to Rebbe Yehuda, both must be done inside. And according to Rebbe Shimon, both can be done outside. As far as overriding Shabbos, it's ambiguous what Rebbe Yehuda and Rebbe Shimon hold. Now, let's take a look at the Gemara. Hagufa kasha. Amart li shasan va'arichasan b'chutz alma midas yavesh lo niskadsha va'afiyasan b'fneim alma midas yavesh niskadsha. So the Gemara says there seems to be an inherent contradiction in the opinion of the Tanna Kama. You told me that the dough is prepared outside, which implies that any utensils that you use to work with the showbread is chulin, is non-sanctified, because that's why you can do it outside. But then you told me that the oven, which is used to bake it, which is also a utensil in the preparation, must be done inside. So it seems like half of the utensils are sanctified and half the utensils are non-sanctified. Why is that? Why should that be? You should either require fully sanctified or fully non-sanctified. So Amar Rabba, Hiksha Adam Kasha Shuhu Kasha Kabarzel Umano Rav Sheshes. So Rabba comments on this. This is a tough question that was asked by a tough guy who's as hard as iron. He's an Iron Man. And he's basically Eli Nishma Stanley. And he has a really tough question, this guy. Really tough question. So the Gemara says, what do you mean the tough question? This is a tough question? My kushya. Dilma Isaran lo mekadesh, tanur mekadesh. What kind of question is that? Maybe the measuring cups are non-sanctified, but the oven is sanctified. And that's why when you're working with measuring cups, you can do it outside, but once you want to bake it, since the oven is sanctified, it's baked on the inside. So I really don't, I failed to see not only the question, but even more so why you said this is such a tough question. So Ella ikasha hakasha. So the Gemara says, you're right. This was really the contradiction. Va'afiyasin bifnim alma tanur mekadesh. But then you said ve'in dochas es Shabbos ifsala balina. The contradiction is like this. You, Tanna Kama, told me that you must bake the bread inside the temple. What does that imply? That the oven is a sanctifying kli, and therefore once the bread is baked, it's sanctified. If the bread is sanctified once it's baked, you then said in the same breath that you must do it before Shabbos because you can't bake it on Shabbos. What's the problem? When something is cooked in a sanctifying vessel, it becomes now kudshim. If you leave it over until tomorrow to put it on the showbread table, what's the problem? Lina. It's become puzzle already by staying out overnight. So how do you reconcile that? You either have to bake the bread on Shabbos and then put it on the table that same day, or you have to conclude that the baking is not a sanctifying action, in which case it should be able to be done outside the temple. But make up your mind, you can't have it both ways. So, Amar Rava, Hiksha Adam Kasha Shu Kasha Kabar Zlaman Rav Sheshes. That's why Rava made the comment that this question is a tough question that was asked by a tough guy, an Iron Man, who is Rav Sheshes. Right? So the Gemara says, and by the way, this is a compliment to Rav Sheshes, it's complimentary. So Amar Rav Ashi, my kushya, Dilma mai mibifnim b'makam's reason. So Rav Ashi wants to deflect the question, and he says, you know what? Maybe when the Mishnah says that it has to be baked inside, it doesn't literally mean inside the temple. Really, the oven does not sanctify the bread. The oven is outside. But when it says inside, it really means it has to be done by guys who work on the inside. It has to be done by Kohanim, because the Kohanim are in charge of baking the bread. So the bread should be baked in a place where the Kohanim hang out, because the Kohanim are in charge. But not that it has to be inside the temple, just in the environs of the Kohanim. And that's what inside means. It doesn't literally mean inside, it just means where the Kohanim are. So the Gemara says, V'hadar Rav Ashi barusahi, manavshach, i'afia bo'inan's reason, lisha v'aricha nami bo'inan's reason. V'ilisha v'aricha lo bo'inan's reason, afia nami lo bo'inan's reason, ela de Rav Ashi barusai. So Rav Ashi's statement is a barusa. Sometimes it's spelled badusa with a dalet. There's two different there's variant girsos. What does the word badusa or barusa mean? Simply put, with all due apologies to Rav Ashi, it's a mistake. Rav Ashi, what you said is an error. And you find this several places in Shas that Rav Ashi tries to give a simple, pat answer, and the Gemara says that's not going to fly. And why is it not going to fly over here, Rav Ashi? Because if you're saying that the bread, when we say it has to be done on the inside, we really mean it has to be baked by the Kohanim, then why does the kneading and the arrangement of the dough not have to be done by Kohanim? Make up your mind. Mimonavshach. If you're concerned that it should be done by the Kohanim because they have alacrity, they have zrizus, so then every stage of the bread should be prepared by the Kohanim. And if the bread does not have to be baked by Kohanim, then why? If it doesn't have to be prepared by the Kohanim, then why does the baking dafka have to be done by the Kohanim? So therefore, your solution is lacking, and therefore we're going to go back to what we said before. And really, in reality, it is an inherent contradiction, and it's a really tough as nails question that Rav Sheshes was asking. How can you reconcile the fact that it has to be baked inside, and yet it has to be done on Friday? Those two are contradictory statements, because if it's done on Friday, it's going to become pasul belina. So the answer that the Gemara is sticking with, and this is what Rashi speaks out explicitly, is that they are two separate statements that are irreconcilable. If you hold that the oven sanctifies the bread because it has to be baked inside, then you also hold that it's docha Shabbos, and it's done on Shabbos. The baking is done on Shabbos. And if you hold that it can be done outside, then you hold it can be baked on Friday. So therefore, it's really, you have to break down the Tanakama into two different opinions. The first statement is made by Tanakama number 1, who holds that the bread is baked on Shabbos. The second statement is done by Tanakama number 2, who says it's not doicha Shabbos, and therefore I hold that it's baked outside the temple. Okay, which is very surprising, but that's the way you have to learn it.
You can't bake on Shabbos.
Well, you can do all of the avoda on Shabbos. You can bring karbanos on Shabbos, right. So you're shechting on Shabbos, right? So this is a form of avoda according to this opinion. It does override Shabbos. Now Reb Yehuda Omer kol ma'aseim bifnim v'chulei. So now we saw the next two opinions in the Mishnah. One is Reb Yehuda and one is Reb Shimon. Reb Yehuda said everything, both the kneading and the baking, inside, and Reb Shimon says no, everything can be outside. Both the kneading and the baking can be outside. Now, Omer Rebbe Avohu Bar Kahana Ushnei Mikra Echad Darshu. Where do they get this? What's the machlokas based on? It's based on the story that appears in Sefer Shmuel Aleph, the very same story, but having to do with how you read a certain difficult pasuk. We know the story. The story is that David was on the run with his army from Shaul HaMelech. He comes to Nov Ir Kohanim, seeking sanctuary, and they give him sanctuary. And David says, I need something to eat for myself and my men. So what do the Kohanim give him? They give him the lechem hapanim. That's what is recorded in Shmuel Aleph, Perek Chav Aleph. But there's a strange pasuk that appears there which says as follows. David turns to the Kohen Gadol and he says, I'm just going to get the pasuk. V'hu derechol, it is the way of the weekday. Va'af ki hayom yikdash bakeli, even though today it is sanctified in a vessel. Now, David is referring in some aspect to the showbread. But what does he mean by those words? It is the weekday, but it is being sanctified in a vessel. So Rabbi Yehuda savar b'chol ashkechinu deka afule. So Rabbi Yehuda says that it was Friday when David meets up with the Kohen Gadol, and he discovers that they're baking the showbread on Friday. Amr lehu derechol ka'afisule, afki hayom yikdash b'kli ifsule belina. And David was criticizing the Kohen Gadol. He says, how can you bake it today? If you bake it today, it's going to become pasul belina because the baking has to be done inside the Mishkan. And if it's being baked inside the Mishkan and you're baking it today, it's sanctified, and it's going to be pasul by the time tomorrow rolls around because of the principle of lina. So David's criticism was you can't have both. You have to really bake it tomorrow. And that's how Rabbi Yehuda knows it has to be baked inside the temple, and it's doicha Shabbos. Rabbi Shimon savar b'Shabbos ashkechinu deka afulei, amar lehu lo derech chol ba'isul amivdei, miditanur mekadesh shulchan hu de mekadesh. And Rabbi Shimon learns the pasuk just the opposite, that David met up with them on Shabbos. He sees that they're baking the bread on Shabbos. And David is critical, and he says, you're not allowed to bake the bread on Shabbos. But, says the Kohen Gadol, but if we bake it on Friday, it'll be sanctified and become pasal belina. So David said to them, what are you talking about? Just bake it outside in a non-sanctifying oven. It won't be sanctified because the bread is not sanctified until you put it on the table itself. Only on Shabbos when you put it on the table. So therefore, you need to bake it on Friday outside the temple, that's what Reb Shimon holds, and then sanctify it on Shabbos. Now, the Gemara says, okay, if that's what their argument is based upon, this story and how you interpret that pasuk, the question is like this. Umi matzis amart de b'shasa fia ashkechinu v'haksiv v'yiten lo hakohen kodesh ki lo hayasham lechem kim lechem aponim hamusar milifnei Hashem. But look at the story. The story says that the Kohen Gadol gave King David the showbread. Why? Because there was no other food to eat except for the loaves that had already been removed from the table. So it couldn't have been on Friday. It couldn't have been on Shabbos. It could have been on Shabbos, but not while they're baking the bread, but after they've already baked the new loaves, put them on the table and remove the old loaves off the table, because that's what it says, that the Kohen Gadol gave David the loaves that had been removed off the table. So you can't tell me that he's encountering them while they're baking the bread and criticizing. That doesn't make any sense. So Ella, says the Gemara, "Mai derech de ka'amr lehu hachi ka'amru lei." So the Gemara says, you're right, we totally blew the interpretation of the pasuk. Let's read it again. What they were saying to David was as follows: Leka lechem ki im lechem hapanim hamusar milifnei Hashem. David said, I and my men are hungry. We need to eat. They said back to him, sorry, we only have the lechem hapanim that has just been removed off the table, but we can't give it to you. It's meant for the Kohanim. So Amar Luhu Lomi Bayahai the Kevin Denafak Le Mimeila Derecholhu. So David says to them, of course we're allowed to eat that, because once Kohanim can eat it, we too are allowed to eat it and are not going to be subject to the laws of Me'ilah. But I'll go even further, says David. Ela afilo hechnami dehayom yikdash bakeli havulei delechol mesukanhu. But David said, even the bread that is now today sanctified in the vessel can be treated in a whole fashion, in a chulin fashion. Why? Because even though normally the freshly baked showbread has to remain on the table all week and no one's allowed to eat it, that's only when there's no pikuach nefesh. But we are in a state of sakana. My men and I are so fatigued that if we don't eat, we're going to die. And therefore, there's nothing that stands in the way of pikuach nefesh. So therefore, we're allowed to eat even the fresh showbread. That's what David was saying to them in that pasuk. And therefore, so Taka, what then is the machlokas between Rabbi Yehuda and Reb Shimon based on, if it's not based on that story? Rabbi Yehuda and Reb Shimon b'gemara pligi. Their machlokas is not based on any pasuk, it's based on a tradition. Rabbi Yehuda says, my tradition is that it always has to be baked inside, and it therefore is doicha Shabbos. And Reb Shimon says, my tradition is it can be baked outside, and therefore it's not doicha Shabbos. Di kanami, we can infer that from the statement in the Mishnah of Reb Shimon. Dikatani Reb Shimon oimer, la'olam haviragil lomar shtei halechem v'lechem haponim kisheros ba'azara, ukisheros abeis pagi shmamina. Because what did Reb Shimon say? Get in the habit of saying that the showbread can be baked equally in the temple and equally outside the temple in Beis Pagi. Why did he have to say get in the habit of saying it if he based it on a pasuk? The fact is that he said get in the habit of saying it because I don't have any textual source to bolster my point, and therefore get in the habit of saying it so you remind yourself, because it's all based on Torah Sheba'al Peh, all based on an oral Mesorah, not based on anything textual. And this is where we'll hold it for today. Have a great day.